Welcome back. We are joined today by Pepe Escobar, a journalist and an author. Thank you for coming back on. It's good to see you again.
Always a pleasure, Glenn. And greetings from Buddhist, peaceful Southeast Asia.
Well, I think the first time we met in person was in Moscow. I was working there.
Years ago.
It feels like ages ago now. But I was working there for a department focusing on the Greater Eurasia Initiative, that is for Russia to integrate its economy, through industries, physical corridors, financial instruments from China to India, Iran, and you as a journalist have been working on this as well. That's been a while. But this whole initiative is seen as an effort to essentially, reorganize the international economic architecture. And of course, Russia and China tends to form the core, but India, Iran, many others have an interest in this multipolar economic architecture. I thought a good place to start today would be to ask you, how do you see Iran's role in this whole thing, in this construct?
Well, stepping a little bit away, but not so much from the war, Glenn. This is one of my latest columns this week. I sent you a copy, which is an update on what I called years ago the war of connectivity corridors. So basically, we have all those connectivity corridors part of the New Silk Roads, the Belt and Road Initiative. There are at least 6 of them, maybe 7, in fact, including the Maritime Silk Road, east to west. Then there's the north to south, the north-south international transportation corridor. 3 bricks, Russia, Iran, and India, which is something that I had the privilege, in fact, to follow last year in Iran when we were in Iran at the same time. And I remember they were very busy talking to them all the time. And on my side, I was working on this documentary, which is the first one in the world in English about the corridor. And we were very privileged because we had full access. We had all the permits, so we could go from the Caspian Sea to Bandar Abbas, Persian Gulf, and then Chabahar Sea of Oman, and see everything, and especially what's lacking, and the problems, of course, and the challenges and the problems. And I talked to some absolutely first-rate traders and geopolitical analysts in Iran about it. So that is one of the key new corridors of the future, north to south, across Eurasia, bypassing Suez, bypassing sanctions, bypassing SWIFT. And then there are 2 more corridors. There are, I would not even say in progress, but for the moment, they are more like pipe dreams. One of them is IMEC. And the denomination it's a misnomer because it's not only India Middle East corridor. Most of all, it is Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Europe, and India corridor. And the idea is to place the port of Haifa as a key trading port, connecting with the Arab world, connecting to Europe, and connecting to India. As it stands, you can say that this is dead. And in fact, even Saudi Arabia is practically saying by not saying that this is dead. And then there are the Turks. And as you know very well, Glenn, they are always hedging. So they are even resuscitating a long gone idea from the late 2000s, early 2010s, a pipeline from Qatar across the Arab world to Turkey, and then they can sell Qatar gas to Europe. For the moment, also is just a pipe dream. So in this column, I try to analyze the pros and cons of these 4 corridors. But the logic is the same. The 21st century is going to be a war of connectivity corridors at the core of the Eurasia development and Eurasia integration.
Well, yeah, some would suggest that much of the past, at least 200 years, have been organized around wars over connectivity. I mean, in the early 19th century, we know when the Russians were expanding out from the center towards the periphery, this put them in a clash with British India. So this is the Mackinder theory. That is that you have land powers connecting versus the sea power, and then of course in the 20th century we had this continuing, and it's fascinating because if you look through the strategic documents, it always for the U.S., Britain, they always formulated their claim to world power is controlling the seas. That's how they connect the world, and then the land powers, Russia. Worst case in the connected with Germany, or even worse connected with China, would then begin to rival the maritime powers. This has always been a key focus of geopolitics, and it does appear we're still into this. I mean, if you look in with the BTC pipeline, for example, I remember in the 2000s that was a very big thing, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, and then this was a way of skirting for the Europeans to go under Russia and above Iran.
Exactly.
Even getting Ukraine connected into the NATO orbit. This is a way of getting the energy transit country to ally with the energy consumers against the energy producer Russia. So we already seem to be very deep in this connectivity war. But what do you see being the wider consequence of what's playing out now in this war with Iran?
Well, I would say that the number one thing would be what's going to happen with the international North-South transportation corridor. Russia is deeply involved. They are helping to finance railways inside Iran. They could even finance a railway skirting the Caspian Sea to the left of the Caspian Sea, because the Russians think it's going to be much, much faster than trying to upgrade the Iranian port structure in the Caspian. And they're right, Glenn. I went to the port of Bandar Anzali in the Caspian, and it's stuck in the 70s. There's a lot of work to do. So they start getting, for instance, big cargo ships from Astrakhan. I saw some Astrakhan ships in the port, but small ones, not big cargoes. So this is essential. And what's India going to do? We're all asking the same question. What about the relationship between Iran and India when 2 days before the decapitation strike in February 28th, Modi was being received in Israel, and they came up with that motherland and fatherland shtick? And it's a huge problem because India is a huge investor in Chabahar. When I was in Chabahar, it was fascinating. I was talking to the port authorities. They said, you see those cranes over there? They were bought and paid for by India. They are investing. It's a bit of a low at the moment. This was last year. But they promised that in a few months, they're going to, help us develop other parts of the port. The port is expanding very, very fast. It's very impressive. It reminds me like when Shenzhen 30-something years ago, to give an idea, So what's going to happen? The Chinese, of course, they look at Chabahar, they say, look, we can go there, and in 10 minutes, you have everything you need. And they told me, look, the Chinese, we always have Chinese cargoes coming here. In fact, I saw two while I was there. Most of them go to Bandar Abbas, but some of them go to Chabahar. If they are, for instance, stuff that is going to be sold in eastern Iran, or could be sold in Iran or in Afghanistan. There's a very good road that recently finished from Chabahar to the Afghan-Iranian border. So the Chinese, there's a strong possibility that the Chinese will end up taking over Chabahar. Is going to be one more extra connection in their string of pearls of ports, and not far from Gwadar, which is crazy. The distance from Chabahar to Gwadar is 80 kilometers across the border. There's practically sister ports. So China could use both easily. They're already using Gwadar, of course. So this is the big if is what's going to happen to the North-South corridor. And we didn't even talk about the Russian connectivity corridor, which is a thalassocratic corridor, which is the Northern Sea route. that the Chinese call the Arctic Silk Road. This is a corridor that the Northeast Asia, specifically, they are immensely interested, especially South Korea. It's something that we see in those discussions in Russia during the Vladivostok Forum and St. Petersburg. We're going to have the same discussion in St. Petersburg in about 2 months from now. In fact, less than 2 months from now. And of course, the Southeast Asians are also interested in using it because Southeast Asia can connect to Vladivostok. Then you take the North Sea route and you arrive in Murmansk and you are almost in Europe. So these are it was not part of this column, of course, but these are the two key new connectivity corridors, the North-South and the Northern Sea route. And of course, the Chinese, they keep adding to what they have. For instance, something that is in the column as well. They finally finished the China-Iran railway only a few months ago. And guess what the Americans did? They bombed a stretch of this railway inside Iran 2 or 3 weeks ago. Very important because this is from Xinjiang. Of course, everything starts in Xinjiang, but then it goes everywhere. It goes through the Trans-Siberian, it goes through Kazakhstan, it's a middle corridor. And this one is particularly interesting because it's Xinjiang, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and then it crosses the border in Turkmenistan, enters Iran, and from Iran it can go to Turkey, and from Turkey it can go to Europe. And for the Chinese, this is a key corridor. This road, this railway, the Iranian stretch, it's part of what they call the East-West corridor. And it's one of the most important corridors of the new Silk Roads of BRIC. There you go. It's all there. And everybody is interconnected. And the Central Asians are connected with all these corridors as well. So it's important for them as well, because they also receive Chinese merchandise that stays in their countries and the rest keeps going.
Well, given that, you mentioned the attacks on the Chinese connectivity.
China-Iran railway, yes. Yes.
This is quite important, and I also think the connection with Pakistan is important. I mean, if you follow this China-Pakistan connectivity with rail and road, and then cutting down to the ports of Gwadar, which Pakistani port, which is operated by the Chinese, is quite an impressive infrastructure. Where you see essentially this new Silk Road recreating the world as it was before, European maritime powers took over the world 500 years ago. But as you mentioned, I also noticed that the U.S. and Israeli bombing of Iran, not only did it target Chinese infrastructure, but it also targeted part of the railroads which would connect the international north-south transportation corridor, the Russia, Iran, India. So there seems to be a war on multipolarity here. That is, obviously, this seems to be a key target. Do you think China stands out uniquely in terms of a country the U.S. would like to weaken as a result of attacking Iran?
Glenn, in fact, this is a war against multipolarity. There's no question. The number one target, of course, is China. But this is a war against Iran, against China, against the interconnection, against Eurasia integration and interconnection, against Russia on another level, because this is the other war up there, which seems to be a never-ending as well, and a war against BRICS, no question about that. But this has been announced since the start of Trump 2.0, when he started first blabbering about BRICS, which he still has no idea what BRICS is about. It doesn't matter, because the only thing that registered in his 4-year-old psyche, they want to bypass the US dollar. That's the only thing that registers. So, war against everybody. It's the empire of chaos, lies, plunder, piracy, and we bomb everybody that we don't like. This is the American foreign policy now, right? So obviously the Chinese know it's extremely complicated because it's still not clear especially for us foreigners, even if we have access to China, we talk to people in China. I'm going back to China next month again. I was postponing it because of the war. But one of my first questions to anybody is, okay, what is more important for you, BRICS or BRI, or the New Silk Roads? And how do they interconnect? And the second question is, are you fully aware that this is a war against, especially against you? If you follow, I would say, relatively independent media, like our friends in Guancha in Shanghai, when you read some of their best contributors, scholarly contributors, they don't get into detail, but this is more or less, they understand that this is a war against China, of course, and this is a war to try to prevent sources of energy reaching China, which is something that they are seeing in front of them nowadays with the American blockade. And there's already the blah, blah, blah about the Strait of Malacca, which is inevitable. But they have been prepared for a potential blockade of the Strait of Malacca for at least 20 years. And that's why they diversified their sources of energy. So you have multiple sources of energy. You have oil from Kazakhstan. You have a gas pipeline from Turkmenistan. You have gas pipeline from Myanmar. You have Power of Siberia, which is full capacity now, and soon Power of Siberia 2. And of course, all the effort that they made to diversify internally. And when you travel in Xinjiang, it's mind-boggling because you see miles on end. Everything is electrified. You see forests of solar panels, wind turbines, those solar farms where you have that pole, irradiating energy hundreds of kilometers around. And something that I learned from our Uyghur contacts, Xinjiang has so much energy that they sell energy to the rest of China. So that explains why China nowadays is, I would say, 84 to 86%. They don't need to import oil and gas. So their import of oil and gas is about 13-14%. It's not much compared to their national needs. But they know that Malacca continues to be a very, very tricky situation. And now it gets even more tricky, I would say. This deal that the Minister of Defense of Indonesia made with the Secretary of War in Washington, signed in Washington. While Prabowo, the president, was going to Russia and spent 5 hours talking to Russia. This is Indonesia hedging all the time, but they cannot hedge. There's a limit to their hedging because the other BRICS, especially China, are going to say, what the hell are you doing? Are you considering giving overflight rights to the Americans in our Indonesian territory? And at the same time, they're saying, look, maybe we should monetize Malacca. So now there's the idea in Jakarta, okay, they looked at what happened in Hormuz. Malacca is very, very straight. Territorial waters, once again, divided between Sumatra in Indonesia and Malaysia. So both of them can charge a right of passage. Why not? So I'm sure this is going to happen sooner rather than later. So everything, of course, is changing, but this is going to be particularly important. And of course, who doesn't like that? Singapore. But Singapore is not in the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca is to the north. Singapore is on the tip south of the Malaysian Peninsula. It has nothing to do with Malacca. Malacca is a Malaysia-Indonesia affair. So all these things are they are advancing in parallel. So it's dizzyingly complex. But it's a completely different system, and we still don't know where it's going. But the Malacca angle for China is crucial And I'm sure they will exert a lot of pressure on Jakarta about this defense agreement with the Americans.
So when the U.S. develops naval strategies for putting this, limit the reliable access for the Russians to seas on the on the western borders of Russia, they have 3 seas which can be cut off.
Yes.
There's the Black Sea, Baltic Sea, and the Arctic. You see that the U.S. is going after all 3. That was part of the purpose of toppling the government in Ukraine, shutting down the Black Sea fleet of the Russians. Essentially, I would make the Black Sea a NATO lake. You have NATO now speaking openly about making the Baltic Sea a NATO lake by challenging Russia and Kaliningrad, of course, getting Sweden and Finland into NATO. I think the former NATO Secretary General Rasmussen even said we couldn't put a blockade now on St. Petersburg if we would want to. I mean, it's kind of aggressive language, while an American general said we can invade Kaliningrad and there's nothing Russia can do. And as well, you see the militarization of Scandinavia and the U.S. ambitions on cutting off the Russians in the Arctic. So overall, I think this is also a goal of taking Greenland. So they're going after the Russians, but when you want to go after the Chinese, you have the dual island chain, which is important, but in all American documents, which since the 19th, for a long time, but also the Chinese documents, there's always special place for the Strait of Malacca, where they see this is where the Americans would come to try to cut out or shut down the Chinese connection with the world. So, as you said, closing off between Indonesia and Malaysia, I think at the narrow area, it's just like 2.8 kilometers, something. It's very narrow. This is easy to shut down. But how do you see us moving towards that, though? The war in over Malacca. Do you think this is a possible actual war, or do you think? Do you see a link between Iran to Malacca, essentially?
There is already, Glenn. Did you see that they boarded an Iranian ship not very far from the Strait of Malacca? So, this is probably a message. This is an Indo-PACOM operation. And I was joking with some people saying that basically this American task force or invincible armada, cowards now, because they are not in the Gulf of Oman. They are in the Arabian Sea or in the southern Indian Ocean. They are very, very far from the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman. I was joking that this is already an Indo-PACOM operation, much more than CENTCOM. And then when you see that they apprehended a ship already in the Indo-PACOM area, that's the beginning. This is just the beginning. So the Chinese, I'm sure they are horrified about that. I couldn't read any deeper analysis so far. Maybe they are in Chinese military channels, only in Chinese on Weibo or on WeChat, whatever. It's possible. So this is something I'm trying to do in the next few days. But obviously they are horrified, because this is exactly what they have been thinking since the early 2000s, when they started their very, very well coordinated diversification. But they all the oil that they import from the Persian Gulf has to go through Malacca. They cannot get rid of that. For instance, they were thinking about Gwadar, because Gwadar they could build, which is something that they could, but it's going to cost a lot of money, take a long, long time. A pipeline from Gwadar to Xinjiang across Balochistan and then parallel to the Karakoram Highway would be a mega engineering feat. Yes, they could do it, but it's very costly and would take a lot of time. But it's there. The idea is still there. Then they would completely bypass Malacca. That's one possibility. But of course, it all depends because we are in I would say it's 3 weeks ahead. The meeting between Xi and Trump in Beijing is going to be on the 14th. So obviously, Trump is positioning himself to arrive in Beijing with strong cards in his hand, including extortion cards, intimidation cards, typical Trump administration. The Chinese, of course, as we know, they are cool, calm, collected. They play Go. This means that they surround the adversary and they see long term. They don't play this stupid poker that the Americans do. But of course, they are worried. And of course, they're worried even though they have these gigantic 1.3 billion barrels of oil in reserve. This is something we cannot even imagine. But they have it. They accumulated this. They were ready for something similar to what's happening now. Not Malacca, but Hormuz as Malacca, in fact, because as it stands, not much oil is flowing through Hormuz because, of course, of the second blockade. The first non-blockade, the Iranian blockade, it was free for all in terms of Chinese cargo. Now with the second one, it's more complicated. But we still have not arrived at a real cliffhanger. Will this invincible armada have the balls to actually board a Chinese tanker in international waters? I don't think they will take that risk. And the Chinese are betting on it as well. But of course, the quantities they are receiving are not enough compared to the past. It was 1.3 million, 1.4 million a day from Iran. Plus the others then. Plus the oil from Saudi and UAE.
As you said, the Chinese, they know what's going on. They see what's happening. And there's this incrementalism in which we're moving towards it. First, we see this, partial blockade on Venezuela. And again, the Chinese see they're part of the target. The Americans weren't subtle about this either. They've made it very clear. It's not that they have to open up to the US, it's that they have to shut down the trade with the Iranians. And then, of course, now we have the blockade on Cuba, we have the hijacking of Iranian ships, we have the piracy and hijacking of the Russian ships. And so you see this, again, connectivity wars, if you will. And given that the Chinese see themselves as being, well, they're the pay rival of the United States, they are the ultimate target. What do you think how do you think the Chinese are going to react to this? Because they do have a calm demeanor,
Exactly. I'm very curious now to go to China because I decided to go because I think maybe there is an interval before Trump arrives. It will be the best time to go. And then start asking questions there. And while Trump is there, it's the perfect moment to talk to. Of course, as you know, talking on the record with Chinese officials in China is immensely complicated for us, foreign journalists and analysts. But of course, we have our connections. In my case, scholarly connections, former PLA officials now retired. And even if we talk off the record, many of them, they talk, but they say, look, it has to be off the record. No problem. We always get nuggets of information that you won't find in Xinhua, in Global Times, in China Daily, etc. But for the moment, they are not even... it's typical Chinese. They are reflecting upon it. So it's too early to talk about it. But obviously, this strikes a nerve. Malacca for them is a taboo subject. And now it's getting very, very close to home. With this first seizing, relatively peaceful. There was no gunfire involved, apparently. But it was obviously an Indo-Pak message to the PLA Navy, especially. And that's why this is so dangerous. No? Let me ask you something, if you allow me, Glenn, considering your fabulous experience in Russia. How do you see the Northern Sea route being implemented for good within the next few years? They say when you go to those round tables in Vladivostok, for instance, they say, okay, there are lots of challenges, but it can be operational by 2028, 2029. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, I've been to those Eastern Economic Forums in Vladivostok as well, and on those panels, and well, the timeline. I'm not sure if they're able to get it up and running by then. But again, it's on one hand, it's a very competitive advantage because the Arctic corridor of Russia. I mean, this is connecting Europe with Asia through the Arctic. It saves a lot of time and money. So it's a very competitive international maritime route, and it will be pretty much the only one in the world which is not dominated by the United States Navy. So it has a lot of benefits, and even if the U.S. would try to, well, force its way, if you will, you need the search and rescue ports, all these things across the Russian Arctic coastline. So there's no way to really circumvent the Russians there. So the Russians have great leverage there, and also because of the relationship with China, everyone gets the impression sometimes that the Russians can get a bit antsy because they will be more dependent on China than China is on Russia. The Russians overcome this by having a certain degree of strategic autonomy and also diversifying their partnerships, as we've seen in the Arctic. They make sure not just to invite the Chinese, they also invite the Indians,
South Korean, Indians, yeah,
exactly. But also because the ports and all are sovereign Russian territory, it creates more balance in the relationship with the Chinese. So kind of has all the perfect recipe for being a good project. But this being said, it has limits as well. I mean, the Arctic it can't become the main corridor. It's simply one of many, which allows countries to diversify. And again, I think often people see it as it gives the potential of a Russian stranglehold, but I think this is exaggerated because it won't reach that degree of traffic. I think if anything, having more corridors, it prevents other countries from using corridors as a weapon, because then people lose trust in it. And so the Russians have an interest in keeping it open, to have trust in it, but it can never be so powerful in terms of the amount of traffic that it would pose any threat or give the Russians too much power. So overall, it seems like quite a reasonable project, but nonetheless, the U.S. its hegemonic strategies builds on, and has always done so, on maritime supremacy. And that means two things: all the oceans have to be under U.S. control, and also you have to reduce the physical connectivity on the land. So you want to make sure that Germany is cut off from Russia, bombing Nord Stream, all of this is achieved. You want to make sure that the Chinese are cut off from the Russians, the Russians are cut off from the Indians, Turkey is cut off from Russia. So it's essentially the divide and rule. I think this is how the maritime powers.
Yeah.
And if you go to the Russian, conservative scholar Savitsky and others in the 1920s, they made it clear this is why they consider the maritime powers to be naturally imperialistic, because they can only dominate if they divide. And they had a vision that the Eurasian land powers, they can only become competitive if they cooperate, because yes, China's more powerful, but China's objectives can't be achieved without cooperation with India, Russia, Iran. So there's a natural incentive to cooperate. So this is why they kind of frame the land powers as being more cooperative, while the maritime powers are inherently more imperialistic. I think I drifted a bit away from your question, but I do think it has a lot of potential. The Russians have all the icebreakers. They're building the infrastructure, new technologies, especially drones, make a lot of the infrastructure required for search and rescue much cheaper and reasonable, especially in areas which have not that populated there, which aren't that heavily populated. So I tend to be optimistic about the Arctic route, though. But the problem is, in the past, it was just a frozen desert. There's not that much competitive strategic interest. But now with the maritime corridor, all of these natural resources becoming available, it's lined up for being, taking the center of a zero-sum geopolitical standoff. Again, that's why the American wants Greenland. So.
Exactly. And wow, and Putin is personally implicated, no? It's what he tells us in Vladivostok every year. This is a federal project. And they are investing a lot of money in Arkhangelsk, in Murmansk, in the ports. And they take this as a matter of national security. So it's extremely serious. And at the same time, it interests the Chinese because one of their corridors, for instance, they cannot use for the moment, the Trans-Siberian. They cannot use the Trans-Siberian anymore because of sanctions. So that's why they are investing so much in these middle corridors, the east-west corridor, etc. Going south, going through the north, it's impossible. But going to the deep north in the Arctic is perfect and relatively fast.
And yeah, well, that's why it's funny that Vladivostok on the Pacific coast of Russia is connected also now with India. So India will also partake in the in the Arctic project. Also, people don't consider India to be an Arctic country, but this is kind of the weird stuff because once Sweden, Finland became part of NATO, you essentially have all the Arctic states. You have all the Arctic states are NATO members except for Russia, which is half of the Arctic. And in the past, the Russians, because they wanted to integrate with the Europeans and to have a common European home, as Gorbachev framed it, they essentially earmarked all Arctic cooperation with the Western countries. But now that it's become obvious that there will be no common European home, we'll only have bloc politics, the Russians are looking towards the east. So now the Arctic is becoming this roof of Eurasia, in which they're inviting Eurasian powers instead of the West. So I think in the future we're gonna kick ourselves for what we have done. That is the Europeans, because all this Arctic gas, which was supposed to fuel our industries, cheap gas for the next 30 years, this has now been signed over to the Chinese instead, because we are obsessed with defeating the Russians instead of finding a political settlement. So it's just, I think historians will look back at this period here as one of the most ridiculous and full of self-inflicted
questions. No question. Yes. And you saw the latest 90 billion, they actually think in Brussels that this is going to be paid by Russian reparations.
Yeah, I saw that. But that's why they call it a loan. 90 billion to Ukraine. How is it a loan? They can't pay it back. And then they explain, oh, well, after we defeat Russia, they will pay in reparations. So essentially the Europeans can't afford peace anymore because peace has, they have to defeat Russia. Otherwise they don't get their money back either.
Otherwise they're going to get their money back.
I always ask though, what exactly is this plan? If you see Russia considers this to be an existential threat, how do you defeat the world's largest nuclear power, which considers it to be in a fight for its survival? Exactly to what extent do you want to be successful? I mean, this is a horrible war on so many levels, the humanitarian, strategic. I mean, anyways, I wanted to just get back to the Iranian Chinese aspect of this, though, because from what I hear now, the Iranians have begun to outline the rules of this new toll system. That is, everyone has to pay toll. If I'm not mistaken, those who participate in an attack on Iran or sanctions Iran, they get a little bit of extra bonus on top in terms of what they have to pay. Also, they don't want dollars. So
only rials, yes. Probably rials, but obviously they will accept yuan, but they won't advertise it. No? The backup currency will be yuan.
So is it? How do you see this impacting then? I mean, this is why countries want control over international corridors, maritime corridors, so then you can, extract political concessions and economic ones. And this would effectively strip the U.S. of much power, though. Is this why the Americans can't leave, or even though they more or less lost the war against Iran, is this why Trump can't go home?
Of course not, because if he gets this off ramp, wherever that is, this is admitting your strategic defeat. The strategic defeat is already there for the whole planet to see. The thing is, the degree of this strategic defeat is going to be extremely humiliating, or there's going to be some face saving inbuilt. We still don't know. But he has to take an off ramp, and he's begging for an off ramp. That's a completely different story. The Iranians can sit on the current situation for months, even though they are paying a horrible price. They already pay a horrible price in terms of the infrastructure that is destructed. There are numbers floating around reaching as much as $270 billion to rebuild what was destroyed during the war. So obviously they badly need a toll booth in Hormuz. This is going to help. They cannot expect the Americans paying reparations because this will never happen. Or they will have to force the Gulfies, especially Emirates, which are for all practical purpose at war with Iran now, not Saudi Arabia, but the Emirates, to pay reparations. So what are they going to do? Attack the Emirates again? Yes, they can. They can immobilize the Emirates in a matter of hours. Very, very easy. And in fact, if the Americans attack again, the number one target apart from Israel is going to be the UAE. And not the Emirates, Abu Dhabi specifically. Dubai, the business model of Dubai is already dead and it's not coming back. Dubai.
How so? The business model is?
Exactly, because I would say the conceptual brain of aligning with the US and Israel in a war against Iran is MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed. He's a very, very dangerous gangster, in fact. Did you see that he sent his son to Beijing, was received by Xi Jinping, and he was lecturing Xi Jinping in Beijing about the Iran-Russia relationship? It's absolutely mind-boggling. These people are they are gangsters and self-entitled. That's even worse. And they made their bet a long time ago. Those famous 1.4 trillion. I think is a little bit too much, but it's probably much less than that they committed to invest in the American economy, and the Americans can build all the data centers that they want in the Emirates. And of course, the direct connection with Israel, which is part of the IMEC as well. Assuming the IMEC one day would happen, probably not. The link between Haifa and the UAE is essential for the corridor, and they still have to build it. They have to build these railways don't exist. If you sum it all up, I think it's over 1,000 kilometers of rails that still have to be built, linking Israel with the UAE. So they made their bet even before the war, and obviously they provided their own territory for U.S. attacks against Iran. The Iranians won't forget that ever. There will be payback. It has already started, but it can get much, much more hardcore later on. And if the Americans try something funny in the next few days, once again, rumor mill, but we have to deal with the rumor mill as well. There could be something happening within the weekend. Well, the Iranians already said what's going to happen. It's very, very simple. We attack Fujairah, we attack Yanbu, and we close the Bab al-Mandeb. That's it. Can you recover from that? No, nobody can. No.
Yeah, when Yemen closes down the Red Sea, I think this is then it's game over.
That's game over. That's game over, and everybody knows that, Glenn. Everybody doing models, whatever. Everybody knows that, and that's why nothing happened with the Bab al-Mandeb so far, because this is the ultimate joker. Then it's total collapse. The global economy is already collapsing even more because of this absolutely ridiculous blockade, which is not blockading anything. Ships continue to go through. And it's fascinating because if you navigate in the Iranian territorial waters, Pakistani territorial waters, and Indian territorial waters, very close to the coastline, that's it. You go from Karg to Mumbai. Very simple, And I'm sure a lot of cargoes now are doing that. Tankers are doing that now. Why do you need to navigate in the middle of the Arabian Sea? You know that the Americans are there. or at least they tell us they are. We still don't know where exactly they are placed. There's no visual identification of where these destroyers are placed. Somewhere between the Arabian Sea and the southern Indian Ocean. That's very, very far away from the coastline of Iran and Pakistan.
Given that they're so far away, the region gets so stretched out as well, which means we need a lot of ships. So
Of course,
just from the manpower, the ships being used, I mean, they're really exhausting the resources, making matters worse. At some point, where do you dock? Where do you do the maintenance? A lot of these are going to make them very vulnerable. So it's a dangerous strategy they're playing. If we go back into full out war, the US could be in very bad shape. So
yes,
no, it's
if we go back to war, these ships are going to be attacked by missiles and drones, swarms of missiles and drones. There's no question. The Iranians are just waiting. This will be part of the war 2.0. One of the first things. Okay, let's attack the US Navy, whatever they are.
As the Chinese would say, interesting times. So thank you very much for taking the time. Any final thoughts?
My pleasure, Glenn. I hope to see you in Russia soon.
Yeah, I'm going soon. So thank you.